Aidan Goodman thought he was on his way to an everyday investigation. Little did he know that abysmal evil was already waiting for him. Unconcerned, the author sat in his single cabin in the train and wrote in his diary. Diary entry, May 15th, 1952. Now that I'm on this train, I think my parents were right. I remember them bringing it up at Christmas dinner. They were immensely proud of me, they said, but I could do more with my talent. I should write something that would change the world. And that's exactly what I'm going to do now. Aidan Goodman, well-known author of many novels, was about to write his first book that wasn't just for entertainment. He had written some crime novels, thrillers, and romance novels. That was exactly the point that his parents always criticized. He had so much talent that he needed to do more than just entertain. He needed to make people think. His first book, which was to change the world, was to be about the town of No More. This is where the freeing of slaves began many years ago, which eventually led to there being no more slaves in the whole country. The people were free. He wanted to investigate what made this place so gracious and so special, and put it down on paper. As he got out of the car, the dense fog disconcerted him. Somehow it didn't fit in with this wonderful moment. When his feet first set foot on the ground he considered sacred, he could barely see anything. As the train moved on, the author approached some of the friendly inhabitants of this progressive-minded town. Strangely, none of them were willing to help him. The friendliest response he got was a growl from an old man. This irritated him so much that he was no longer sure he got off at the right stop. Was this really the lovely, gracious town he wanted to visit? As he looked for a sign, he heard a warm and friendly voice greeting him. "Hello, Mr. Goodman. I'm Janice Keebler. Mr. Kane told me to come pick you up here," said a young woman. There it was at last, the kindness he expected from a resident of this town. The blonde maid offered to call him a carriage or cab, but he declined. It only took 10 minutes to walk to the hotel, and Goodman wanted to take advantage and take the opportunity to know the city a little. He found it exciting that carriages still ran there. The houses he saw on his way looked as if they had once been really magnificent. Now, however, they were very dirty, and many of them were in need of restoration. The shutters were closed on almost all the windows, but the author still felt like he was being watched. "So, Miss Keebler, what's it like to live in a wonderful city like this?" The young maid was somewhat surprised. Well, it's a very simple life we lead here. How is it that a successful author like you has chosen our small town to visit?" "Miss Keebler, this is not an easy little town, at least not easy for me. It's a really important place. I'm sure you know that this is where the liberation of the slaves began, and that's the subject of my next book, so I'm here to write." Miss Keebler said nothing but nodded politely. They arrived at No More Central Hotel, and Goodman was met by the owner, Zebediah Kane. He told him that he was a great fan of his books, while Goodman filled out the registration form. "I'm honored that you appreciate my work, Mr. Kane. To tell you the truth, I'm here to write. The book is about the freeing of slaves, and since it all started here, I thought it would be a fitting place to—" When he looked up from the sign-in sheet, he saw that Kane had turned his back on him and was muttering curses into his beard as he left the room. That was strange. Shouldn't Kane be more pleased that he was to write about No More? After all, it could bring him a lot of new guests. Anyway, Janice Keebler was back with the key to his room and offered to carry his suitcases up to the 3rd floor for him. As an older school gentleman, he naturally declined and carried his suitcase himself. The lock to his room must not have been used for some time because the maid had trouble opening it. At the end of the corridor, Aidan saw a tall, strong man standing there. The author was pleased because it was the first dark-skinned man he had seen here. The tall man, however, did not share his joy. He looked confused and angry. Just as Aidan was about to speak to him, Janice got the lock open and almost fell into the room. Goodman quickly grabbed her by the arm and saved her from a rough landing. When he looked up again, the tall man was no longer there. There was no staircase at the end of the corridor, so he must live in one of the other 2 rooms in this hallway. "Thank you, Mr. Goodman." "What? Oh, yes, of course. Excuse me, the man who was standing over there, who is he? Is he perhaps a descendant of freed slaves? I'd love to interview him for my book." The maid was visibly confused. "I'm sorry, Mr. Goodman, I haven't seen anyone here. Your room is the only one on this floor that's currently rented out." Goodman was sure she had been misinformed. The man was certainly his neighbor, and that was a good thing. He told the maid that he would have dinner in his room tonight, as he wanted to start writing immediately. The room was very simply furnished. There was a bed, a desk with a candle on it, a chair, and a chest of drawers. The reason he wanted this particular room was because he had his own small bathroom. When Aidan Goodman was in the flow of writing, he didn't want to be interrupted at all costs. Sometimes he didn't leave his room for days. He lit the candle and began to write. The dense fog in the old buildings gave you no idea that you were walking through the streets of the most advanced city in the world. No machine was invented here, no medicine, no method of treating heart disease, but equality. The author was disturbed by a muffled noise, as if someone had banged their fist against the wall in the next room. He had known that he was not alone here. It was probably the tall man he had seen earlier. When Aidan traveled, he really didn't ask for much, but a minimum amount of rest should be probably given. He decided it was best to go over and politely ask the man to stop making noises like that, and if they were already talking, he could tell him what he was writing about, and maybe the man would have a story or 2 to add. When Aidan knocked on his door, he noticed that it was open. "Sir, it's me, your new neighbor, Aidan Goodman. I'll come in for a minute if you don't mind." The room was dark, empty, and very, very cold. That was strange. Aidan was sure the noise was coming from this room. He took a few steps inside, but found no sign that anyone lived there. One small detail, however, caught his attention. There were tiny red marks on one part of the wall. As he got closer, he saw that it was blood. This small part of the wall was also slightly dented, and the wallpaper was torn. Then the author realized that he was standing at the exact spot on the wall where his desk was on his side, where it had just been where he was just writing. Suddenly, Aidan felt anger. But it wasn't his. It felt like the room was angry with him, angry that he was there. And as if the room or something in that room hated him. Without hesitation, Aidan sprinted out of the room and shut the door behind him. His heart was pounding wildly and he was sweating profusely. To get this nonsense out of his head, it was probably best to eat dinner now. He would eat in the dining room, not alone in his room. He needed to clear his head. After all, he would be attending the 50th anniversary celebration of the freeing of the slaves in the market square tomorrow. Aidan ate his supper without really talking to anyone, and then he went to sleep. His first day in No More was different from what he had imagined. The next day. It was on this day, 50 years ago, that the brave people of No More decided that enough was enough. The war was still in full swing, and there was a food shortage across the country. So the wealthier citizens of No More sacrificed much of their wealth to buy food from a clever trader who was smuggling food. This allowed them to feed the people of No More, as well as the many slaves they kept. The day before the shipment was due to arrive, the town council, along with the mayor and pastor, decided it was best to store the food in a neutral location. The slaves of No More were given the difficult task of erecting a large shed outside the town in just one day. And as always, they did a good job. In the middle of the night, when the shed was almost finished, a tired slave knocked over an oil lantern and started a fire. 2 of the slaves lost their lives in the flames, and several were seriously injured. The citizens of No More decided that such an injustice should never happen again. They decided that making people work against their will was unjust. They decided that not treating dark-skinned women and men like human beings was unjust. They decided that it was over. No More freed all his slaves before the shipment arrived. And now, 50 years later, the whole world followed No More's good example. All men are free. There was a little confetti and restrained applause from a handful of people who had listened to the speech on the market square. None of those present were old enough to be contemporary witnesses. Aiden was confused. Was this the right celebration? Was he in the right place? No one here seemed to care much about the most significant moment in this town's history. The short speech on the small stage had obviously ended. While most people simply left the square and moved on to other things, Aiden got himself another hot dog from the stand. On his way back to the hotel, he realized that his motivation to write about No More was zero. The people from here didn't seem to be interested in the liberation of slaves anymore. If he didn't find a contemporary witness or a dark-skinned citizen for an interview by tomorrow, he would just go back home. The author was torn from his thoughts when he heard a man shouting. He looked around but could see nothing. A few seconds later, he saw a shadow right in front of his feet. The shadow grew bigger. Something was falling. Goodman just managed to drop to the side, otherwise the body, which was now hitting the sidewalk, would have hit him. His first impulse was to help the man. Then he saw that he had no eyes, and his throat had been torn out. Aiden fainted. It was the officer's smelling salts under his nose that woke him up a short time later. The body had already been taken away. The officer examined him very critically, and then his eyes widened. "My goodness, it's him, the author, Goodman. I knew it was him. Terry? I don't believe it. You were right. Sir, are they awake?" Yes, he was, but he was still confused. Had he hit his head on something, or had he really seen a body that had fallen right next to his feet? He wasn't sure. "Yes, I'm awake. What happened?" "You fainted, sir." "I realized that already. I mean, I remember someone falling." The 2 officers looked at each other and nodded. "The man you saw was the latest victim of the Inferno. That's what they call themselves. They threw the poor guy out of the window, but he was already dead. Mr. Goodman, you can help us a lot here. Have you seen anything strange?" The author raised an eyebrow. "You mean, apart from a dead guy with no eyes and no throat falling off a house onto me? No, I didn't see anything else." Alan and Terry, as the 2 officers were called, were amazed at the author's powers of comprehension. One second he had absorbed so many details, they were even more excited when he told them that he was here to write. They automatically assumed he was working on another novel and asked if they could be a part of his latest work. "We'll see," said the author. He had learned from Mr. Kane, the hotel owner, not to tell everyone why he was really there. But maybe the novel wasn't a lie after all. Perhaps he would no longer write about the liberation of slaves, but rather a new entertainment novel. Perhaps this murder case from now could inspire him to write a new story. At least the Inferno sounded like a lot of excitement, so he wanted to find out more about the group. Unfortunately, the 2 officers didn't know much more about them, apart from the fact that they killed people in a special way and that they were called the Inferno. However, Alan had an idea. "We got a message from them. We don't know what they were trying to tell us. Hey, if they wanted to take a look at our station as research for their book, we could show them the message." The 2 of them really wanted to be a part of his book, it seemed. Aiden still wasn't motivated to write about No More, and certainly not about the police station here, but a murdering cult leaving messages, well, that was a bit more interesting. So he went with them. The station was small, but surprisingly well equipped. Since his room at the hotel had no electricity, he hadn't expected the station to be any different, but it was. There was even a telegraph right next to their desks. After taking a quick look at the cells, the gun cabinet, and even the toilet, he pretended to write something in his little notebook. The two officers were delighted. "We're glad that our station inspires you, Mr. Goodman. Now comes the best part, the kitchen. That's where we got the news about the inferno." In the kitchen, Alan opened the fridge and took out a plastic bag while Terry got him a magnifying glass.
How did they come to store evidence from a murder in a refrigerator? Aiden wondered in his mind. Then he understood. The message from the inferno was written on a piece of human skin. When Alan put the piece of skin on the table, he saw that he needed the magnifying glass to read it. The text was tiny. It must have been written with a scalpel. Aiden took the magnifying glass from Terry and began reading the disturbing message. "I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, said Belial the Lord, the one who is, the one who was, and the one who always will be, the Almighty. And I saw a burning horse with a red rider on it. The name of the horse was Murder, and the name of the rider was Liar. The horse and rider opened the door for Lord Belial, and he walked through. He is here, and we want him to stay. The man of the Green River will come and expose the lies of the world. Praise the fire. Praise the blood. Hail Belial." For a brief moment, Aiden felt like he was losing his mind, but then he pulled himself together for now. "Totally bonkers, right?" Alan said with a smile. Indeed, that was it. The officers escorted him back to the hotel. He didn't tell them that he lived in his hometown right next to the Atacora River, which the locals sometimes called the Green River. Aiden himself was sure it was a coincidence. Alan and Terry assured him that he could come by any time he felt like it, and then he said goodbye. As he was quite hungry and was relatively late, the author went straight to the dining room on the first floor, and the only person sitting there was Janice Keebler. "Oh, Mr. Goodman, I'm delighted to see you. Have a seat, dinner's ready." There were almost a dozen people here at the same time yesterday. When he asked where all the other guests were, Janice told him that everyone else had checked out this morning, then served him a steak, potatoes, and a salad. "Would you mind eating with me? Dining alone in this huge room would be pretty depressing." Janice gladly agreed. They really liked this man. They talked about the weather, politics, and their families. It was a good conversation, but it wasn't what Aiden really wanted to talk about. "Miss Keebler, I have to be honest with you. No More is very different from what I imagined. Most of the people are unfriendly. Nobody is interested in freeing the slaves. And that's not all. Last night a strange man banged his fist against my wall, and I didn't care if there was supposed to be anyone there. I saw him. And then today I discovered this cult, the Inferno. You worship the demon lord Belial. What am I to make of this? How did this city become so strange and dark when it was so progressive?" Now that everything was out, what a relief. Janice giggled a little, and Aiden didn't understand why. "I knew it wouldn't take them long to realize that No More wasn't the place of hope and progress they imagined, but in under 24 hours, that was fast." "Do they know anything about what's going on in this town?" "I know that people here often lie, and yes, sometimes I see people who shouldn't be here, and I wasn't surprised that a cult like the Inferno chose this city to do whatever it is they do here. But I do know any details or secrets? No, nothing. Unfortunately, no. I've always wanted to find out myself what's actually going on and going wrong in this town." "Maybe we can find out together," said Aiden. Janice smiled. "Maybe we can." When the author went upstairs to his room, he felt much better. Having the lovely Miss Keebler as an ally did him some good. She was very different from the rest of No More.
He sat down at his desk and saw that his large notebook was open. The page he had written on last night had been torn out, and someone had written "liar" on it. He hadn't locked the door when he left for the 50th anniversary party at lunchtime today, but he would definitely lock it tonight. Surprisingly, he was able to sleep very well. Little did he know that things would get stranger and stranger from here on in. The next day, the author was still the only guest at the No More Central Hotel. The good thing was that he and Miss Keebler could use the dining room as sort of a headquarters for their investigations. Today, however, it was difficult to have a conversation because they were constantly drowned out by the howling wind and rolling thunder. Even the rain was so loud that it sounded like hail. When the author had finished his report on the visit to the police station, Janice was irritated. The message really said the man from Green River? And they kept the message in their fridge where they keep their lunch? That's disgusting. Aiden nodded. Do you know what we should do? We should visit the pastor. He's well over 80, but he's still doing his job. If anyone can answer your questions about your book, it's him. I mean, after all, he was there. That made sense. As Aiden was about to answer, the bell at the reception desk rang. Janice excused herself and sprinted toward the reception hall. Visiting the pastor was a great idea, the author thought. He'd be able to talk to a contemporary witness after all. It looked like his project wasn't lost. Miss Keebler came back and looked worried. "It's for you, Mr. Goodman, an officer named Dutch Tyrell. He needs to see you and asks you to hurry." Hurry up? Aiden knew the cops were obsessed with him and his book, but what was the point of hurrying? He thanked Janice for delivering the message and has made his way over to the receptionist. "Mr. Goodman, I'm sorry to disturb you, but we need your help. Alan said he had already told you about the inferno." "He did. Why do you ask?" "Well, we've arrested one of the cultists. He broke into the house of an elderly couple, and it looks like the inferno has taken them hostage. We have to hurry." "I'm sure that's terrible, but why exactly are you telling me this?" "Oh, I'm sorry. The guy says he'll talk, but only to the author who writes about No More. He must mean you. Please come with me." Although he didn't feel comfortable at the thought of taking on this responsibility, he quickly picked up his coat and hat. On their way to the station, the wind blew so hard in their faces and the heavy rain penetrated even through Aiden's thick coat. Shortly before their destination, the author became nervous. He was willing to help rescue the hostages, but he knew nothing about interrogating a criminal. What if he messed things up? The officers didn't seem to have those worries. Alan and Terry looked very pleased when the two of them arrived at the station. "I knew they would come. Thank you, Mr. Goodman." Alan took him over to the cell. It was so dark that he could barely see the man inside. This gentleman here had a few conditions. He only talks to them alone. We have to leave the room, and they have to talk to him face to face. We've already put a chair in your cell, and don't worry, he's handcuffed to the bed and can't even reach you. You're absolutely safe in here, Mr. Goodman," said Alan. Now, it was too late to refuse. If he had been told these conditions at the hotel, he would not have come. As he made his way into the small dark cell, he got an uneasy feeling in his stomach. He sat down on the chair, which now all alone with the cultist, and could see his face, at least partially. He was smiling. His shoulder-length brown hair was wet and hanging in his face. Aiden was sweating again. "It's an unimaginable pleasure, Mr. Goodman. I'd like to offer you a drink, but unfortunately there are none available here." Lightning struck in the distance, and Aiden flinched. Even here in the cell, you could hear every single drop of rain. It was raining so hard. "How do they know me? What do they want from me?" The demon worshiper laughed. "How do I know her? How could I not know her? You're a famous writer. Everyone knows who you are. The question is not what I want from them, but what do you want from me?" What do you think I want from them? That they tell me where the hostages are? Of course I want that, so why don't they tell me? That's not really what they want. That's not why they're here. They want to bring the truth to light. And do you know what happens when you dig deep for the truth? You uncover lies. And so everyone here can see how wonderful and useful they are. The cultist laughed. Aiden did not know he was serious. That's not the reason why people search for the truth. Lies pass away, but the truth remains forever. You know that from every story. Darkness against light, good against evil. In the end, there's always only one winner, said Aiden. But what if there is no end at all? Then the supposed victory is just a brief snapshot and worthless. What if there is never-ending war raging in the background that they have never heard of? What if those who once stood up for the light have fought against the darkness for so long that they have become darkness? What if the balance between light and darkness is slowly but surely tipping toward darkness? Aiden had no idea what the man was talking about. He was here to free hostages and not to take part in a biblical war between good and evil. I don't know why you're telling me this. If they don't want to tell me where the hostages are, that's their business. I'll get an officer. Well, wait a minute. I'll tell you where they are in a few minutes. I swear that. But first, I have to tell you where you'll find something much, much more important. You didn't tell them who hostages are, did you? You were here when it happened, Mr. Goodman. You were there when the slaves were freed. You know exactly what happened, but like most of the other people in this town, they refuse to talk to them. But do they know who they have already told? Their diaries. And I got them for them. Isn't that nice of the Inferno? We like them, Mr. Goodman. Lord Belial likes them. But he'll tell you that in person soon. You can find the journals in the angry man's room at the hotel. Aiden was shocked. How did he know about the man he had seen? That wasn't possible. How could they know that? Do you know this man? Tell me. Of course I'll tell you. I almost forgot. They'll find the 2 missing people in the warehouse west of No More. The officers know that building. We're both done now. Aiden had the urge to shout at him. He wanted to know what the angry man was all about. However, Alan interrupted them both to get an update. Hey, did that skunk tell you something, Mr. Goodman? With great difficulty, the author managed to calm down. Not much, but he just said the hostages were in the warehouse west of No More, and you'll know where to find them. Indeed, we know that. We'll be on our way immediately. They went back to the officer's office together, and Alan locked the door to the cells. Hey, Mr. Goodman, please stay here in our office while Dutch, Terry, and I search for the hostages. We'll take you back to the hotel later. It's a little dangerous for you to walk alone at the moment. The 3 men of the law were out the door so quickly that Aiden didn't even have time to protest. They were right that walking alone was too dangerous while the Inferno was running around outside in the dark. But he didn't feel comfortable here at all, alone with the cult either. While the thunderstorm still raged outside, the author's thoughts revolved around the cult and what it had to do with the liberation of the slaves. Why did they want him to continue his research? And what was all this talk about lies and the demon Belial? That was some strange stuff. Everything here was strange. He tried to open the front door, but it was locked. Perhaps to keep the cultists out. Suddenly, he heard voices from the back rooms. They were coming from the corridor with the cells. As this door was fortunately also locked, he stepped closer and tried to understand the content of the conversation. I'm sorry. I told him everything I was supposed to tell him. Yes, I shouldn't have told him about the war. That was a mistake. It was the cultist he had just spoken to. The man sounded like he was crying. He heard another voice, but it spoke too quietly, and he couldn't understand anything. Please, have mercy. No, please, not like this. The author heard him crying and was torn up inside. Should he try to help the man? He was a cultist, and perhaps even a murderer. Nevertheless, he didn't deserve to be killed. But what if he tried to help him and then saw that it was something supernatural he was up against? What if it was the demon Lord Belial who was punishing his servant? Now he heard something that sounded like cuts. The cultist cried out briefly. "Hey, leave that man alone," Aiden yelled. He immediately regretted it. But at least the slashing had stopped. But what now? Would the demon focus on him? Aiden nearly had a heart attack when the front door opened and the officers rushed in. "Hey, Mr. Goodman, you all right? We heard you scream," Terry said as he gasped for air. "Thank God they're here. Someone in that cell and someone's hurting the prisoner." The officers looked at each other in disbelief. "It's not possible, Mr. Goodman. The back door and the cell are locked, but we'll have a look anyway, of course." "Hurry up, Dutch," said Alan. Dutch took the keys out of his pocket and opened the door so that the four of them had a good view of the cell. The cultist's eyes and throat were missing, and his stomach was slit wide open. His innards slid out. The sight was so disgusting that Aiden threw up in one of the trash cans by the desk. After searching the entire station and surrounding area and finding no cultists or evidence that anyone had broken in, they cleaned out the cell. Terry had a mortician to take the body away, and when Alan asked if they should accompany him home now, Aiden declined. Even if the Inferno attacked him, the three of them would hardly be able to protect him. He thought to himself, not even a man in their own cell was safe, and the hostages were dead too. Dutch had told him. They were lousy at their job. So the author went home alone. It was still raining, but the wind had died down. So many questions were buzzing around in his head, but he had decided to ignore them for the time being, at least until tomorrow, because he desperately needed to sleep. When he entered the hotel, he noticed that the candles weren't lit. That was strange. It wasn't that late, after all. He could barely see anything, but he found the stairs anyway. As he was on his way up, he heard someone crying. Irritated, he looked over to the reception desk and recognized Zebediah Kane. Even in the dark, the old man looked miserable. "Mr. Kane, is everything all right?" "For fuck's sake, leave me alone." Aiden had too much on his plate to worry about Kane's problems anyway. Maybe business wasn't going well. As he stood outside his door, the author remembered what the cultist had said. He had claimed to have left the diaries of the murdered hostages in the angry man's room. Although he was pretty tired, Aiden couldn't resist the temptation. Once again, the author knocked on his neighbor's door, only to find that it was open again. The two books lay in the middle of the freezing cold room and seemed to be just waiting for him. So the Inferno hadn't been lying. One of the cultists had actually been in the hotel and had placed the books here. What had he gotten himself into? Aiden quickly grabbed the books and left the room again. After locking the door to his room, he thought about what he had just done. Aiden had done exactly what the cultist had asked him to do. Didn't that also make him a hostage of the Inferno? Did he really want to become part of their sick game? Or had he already been? No! The author packed the diaries in his suitcase and wouldn't touch them until the entire cult was behind bars. "They're the ones spreading lies, not the citizens of No More," Aiden said as he washed his face. "They freed all their slaves. That's a historical fact. These people were revolutionaries," he muttered defiantly to himself as he dried himself off. "Why are you lying?" Aiden was scared to death. Who had said that? In the mirror, the author saw the angry man standing behind him. It looked like he was even angrier than usual. The mirror cracked and the angry man stormed toward the author. When he turned around, there was no attacker to be seen. He wasn't going to sleep well tonight, that was for sure. Aiden Goodman stayed awake until it was almost time for breakfast. Then he got some rest. He only woke up again when someone knocked on his door. When he looked out the window and saw how high the sun was in the sky, he realized that it must already be afternoon. He hurriedly got dressed and opened the door. It was Janice Keebler. "Miss Keebler, I'm delighted to see you."
I'm pleased to see that you're doing well. I heard what happened yesterday. When you didn't show up for breakfast this morning, I was worried. Aiden smiled, or at least tried to. Don't worry, I'm fine. Janice looked at him. He didn't look very well, more scared and tired. Who am I kidding here? I feel terrible. What happened at the station yesterday was cruel. The author closed his eyes briefly. He still had that image in his head. I understand that, Mr. Goodman. I would also feel terrible if I witnessed a suicide at close quarters. Now Aiden was confused. Suicide? What are you talking about? Well, the prisoner hanged himself in his cell. That's what the newspaper said. Then the newspaper is lying. The man's eyes and throat were removed, just like the other victims of the Inferno. Janice was shocked. I'm sorry that you had to witness something so terrible, but you still shouldn't hide in your room all day. You need to eat something. Would you accompany me to the dining room? Janice was right. So he washed his face and went down to the dining room with her. They had soup and some bread. As they ate, they talked about everyday topics to take Aiden's mind off his bad experience. It felt like he was sitting at the table with a family member, even though they hadn't known each other that long. In difficult times like these, it was good to have a friend like Miss Keebler. Oh, before I forgot, I spoke to Pastor Morrison. He said he'd love to be available for an interview with you anytime. Really? Thank you. To be honest, I'm quite surprised. Pastor Morrison likes to hear himself talk. I don't particularly like him, but if it helps, we should go and see him. The two ate up, and when Janice finished her shift around 7 p.m., they walked to the church together. It was a 30-minute walk, first through the town and then through a small wooded area. The church itself was very old, several hundred years old, Aiden had estimated. When they entered, an altar boy greeted them and led them to the pastor's office. Ah, Mr. Goodman, welcome to the house of the Lord. Aiden shook his hand while Janice stood by. The fact that the pastor's robe was red and not black irritated the author somewhat. I really appreciate you taking time to answer a few questions for me, Pastor. No. I am grateful. Grateful that they take the time to write about the miracle we achieved here 50 years ago. Ah, yes, miracles. That's a nice way to describing what happened. The two visitors sat down with the pastor, and Aiden took his little notebook out of his pocket. I don't want to waste your valuable time, so I'll start in right away. How did they all come up with the idea of freeing the slaves back then? Oh, my son, the idea didn't come to us. It came to me. And it isn't obvious how the idea came to me. God sent it to me, the Lord himself, after the accident with the cigarette. I thought a lot, and Aiden interrupted him. Excuse me, did you say a cigarette? Wasn't it an oil lantern? The pastor waved it off. Who cares what it was? The poor soul was too careless with one of the two things and killed everyone else. The other two, you mean, said Aiden. Oh, yeah. The other two, of course, said the pastor. And then the idea came to me, if we continued to leave these people in our care and look after them, they would never learn to stand on their own 2 feet. They finally had to look after themselves and learn to take responsibility. Aiden was quite irritated. I see. Excuse me, when you say you took care of them and protected them, what exactly did you mean by that? Well, we gave them food, made decisions for them that they couldn't make, showed them how to build houses, how to plant maize, and many other things. Well, the way they say it, you'd almost think slavery was a good thing. I wouldn't say that, and I wouldn't say it was a bad thing either. It was what it was. Aiden jotted something down in his notebook. Did the church have slaves back then, Pastor Morrison? The pastor was somewhat puzzled by the question. Well, yes, of course, but it was perfectly normal to have slaves back then, and we always treated them well. Oh, I'm sure you did, Pastor, just so my readers can understand. What did slaves do for you? Did they serve food? Did they wash their own clothes and clean the church?
The man of God did not like where this conversation was leading. "Oh, Mr. Goodman, I'm 82 years old. I don't remember anything like that." Sure. Just one last question then. Do you have a message for the people who were recently slaves and are now freed?" "Accept the gift of freedom that I have given you. Stop complaining about the past and finally take responsibility for your own life." The author proceeded to write this down. Both visitors politely thanked the pastor for his time and then left his office. "I don't know if you noticed, Miss Keebler, but this old man's a bit of a racist. That's strange." "I know, Mr. Goodman, but it's not that strange. Many old people are stuck in their ways of thinking." No, they don't understand. This is not just an old man. He started this revolution. He was responsible for freeing the slaves. Why would a racist do that? And in the interview, he said the fire killed all the slaves instead of just 2 of them. This whole story doesn't make sense anymore. When the 2 of them stepped outside, they were somewhat surprised at how dark it already was in the small wooded area. "How long were we in there?" "It's pitch black. I've got the lantern with me. Do you still have the matches?" asked Janice. "Yes, wait a second." He searched for the matches in his coat pocket while the 2 of them walked slowly and carefully toward town. "I've got it. Hold on." It was so dark that Aiden could barely see the lantern himself. When he finally lit it, Janice screamed, "Mr. Goodman!" Now the author saw why she had shouted. At first, he only saw one figure in a hooded robe, but a short time later, he realized they were surrounded by dozens of these people. "Who are you, and what do you want from us?" yelled Aiden. He tried to sound manly, but you could hear the fear in his voice. "Come on, Arthur. Surely you know who we are." "Guess who?" said one of the characters. But you couldn't hear which one of them had said that. There were so many of them. "The Inferno," said Janice in a panic. After all, the woman still has a bit of sense. Good sense. "What do you want from us?" asked Aiden. We already told them that, and to be honest, we're a little disappointed. We tried to help you with the research for your book and spared no expense or effort. And what did you do?" "They didn't even look at the diaries. They killed one of their own people. I don't want to have anything to do with them, and I don't need their help," Aiden shouted angrily. Mays stuck to his script, so he was punished. "That's none of their business." "You disgust me. Leave us in peace at last." "I don't think they realize what position they're in," they said. "They are to use us and the Lord Belial. But if they refuse to cooperate, why shouldn't we kill them both on the spot? Or later, when they're in the hotel and asleep? You know, the Inferno, we are everywhere." It looked as if they only wanted him to read the diaries. If he agreed to read them, they would probably leave him alone. But first, he wanted to get a little more information out of them. "Why are you doing all this anyway? Why do you remove the victims' eyeballs in their throats?" "Isn't that obvious? So they can neither speak the truth nor see the truth. Truth hurts. So they can no longer hurt anyone, or be hurt themselves." "If I promise to read the diaries as soon as I get back to the hotel," Aiden said, "will you leave us alone?" That was sick, but in this perverted mind, this probably made sense, Aiden thought to himself. "No. But we won't hurt you if you keep your promise. You have until dawn. If you haven't read the books by then, the kind Miss Keebler will be our next victim." Janice took Aiden's arm. She was terrified. "I will read them, I promise." Good. When the cultist fell silent, the light from her lantern went out. Aiden hurried and lit it again with another match, but the Inferno was no longer visible. Not a single one of them. "Mr. Goodman, I am so scared." Janice was on the verge of crying. "Don't worry about it. I guess if we read the diaries, we should be safe. They need me, for whatever reason. We'll manage. We'll just go to the hotel and read the diaries." "I really hope they're right." On the way back to the hotel, they looked around every corner for fear that the inferno might still be lurking nearby. When they arrived at the hotel at around 9 p.m., it was already dark and empty. Kane was nowhere to be seen. The diaries lay on Aiden's desk, ready to be read by them. They each took one. They read at the same time and exchanged ideas in between. What they didn't notice was that the ghost of John Miller materialized in Aiden Goodman's room again. He was standing right behind the two of them and was also reading the diaries. Then he recalled the events of 50 years ago while a very real tear ran down his ghostly cheek. They no longer knew what to do. The town council consisted of 3 of the wealthiest citizens, Eleanor Marks, Gilbert Smith, and Gerd Freemason, as well as the mayor, Karsten Damer, and Pastor Morrison. The enemy armies were clever. They had bombed all the bridges in the country, so there was a food shortage in many regions. It felt like the war had been going on forever. Marks, Smith, and Freemason had tried to buy food from a man who was smuggling it on a large scale, but even he wasn't prepared to sell food at the moment. No one knew how long this civil war would last. No More's own supplies were slowly coming to an end. This was also due to the situation with the slaves. No More was an extremely rich little town. In fact, the people here were so rich that they held more slaves than the largest cities in the country. The almost 200 slaves had to eat, of course, and that was not so easy at the moment. Pastor Morrison was of the opinion that they could no longer be trusted. As soon as they found out that they could no longer be fed, they would start an uprising and kill their former masters. But if the slaves disappeared and they were no longer needing to be fed, the supplies would last longer. The other members of the town council became afraid of the possible uprising and asked Morrison how he planned to get rid of the slaves. Most of them would certainly not want to leave in the middle of a war, not even if they were given their freedom. He said all he needed was a handful of men and a few wagon loads of wood. Then he would truly give them freedom. Even if the others didn't know how he wanted to do it, they knew what he wanted to do. But they didn't care. They just wanted to survive. So the pastor gathered all the slaves outside No More and announced great news. Their masters had spent a fortune buying food. It would arrive tomorrow. To store all the food that would feed every soul in No More, they needed a neutral place. The slaves were given the task of building a large shed in which to store the goods. A few men, led by young Zebediah Kane, guarded the slaves while they worked. As always, they did an excellent job. When they had almost finished building the shed, they were told to paint the inside with a special varnish. The pastor said this would help preserve the food longer. Each of them was to help, as if it was already late, and they would soon be able to rest. As soon as the last slave was in the shed to paint it, Zebediah closed the doors and locked them with a thick bar inside. At first, the slaves thought nothing of it. But when Aaron Ruth appeared at the skylight, they panicked. The man threw several flaming torches into the shed, aiming at the buckets of special paint. As a joke, he even took aim at a few of the screaming slaves and laughed at them. Unlike Zebediah Kane, he seemed to have no conscience. The ravenous flames grew quickly, and the slaves' desperate cries were gruesome. When Kane asked Pastor Morrison if it was the right thing to do, Morrison ordered him to never question a man of God again. They would be doing God's work here. The worst thing for John Miller was not the fear of being burned alive, but the fear of seeing his wife and daughter burn. They cried, and he could do nothing but hold them in his arms. When the flames finally engulfed them, John Miller stopped crying. The fear had given way to a much stronger emotion. He was just angry. So fucking angry. Then everything turned red. Aiden and Janice both had tears in their eyes when they finished the part of the diaries that was important to them. The ghost of John Miller had disappeared. It all makes sense now. They killed all the slaves, and when the war was over and help arrived, they made up the story about freeing the slaves to make themselves look like heroes, Aiden said. Janice was disgusted.
I don't want to stay in this town any longer, Mr. Goodman. Please, let's go. This place is terrible. We will go, Miss Keebler. But not just yet. We have to tell the local police about the inferno first. I promise we'll catch the first train afterwards, no matter where it goes. The young maid was happy about that. Aiden didn't even pack his suitcase, but took the diaries and his notebook with him while Janice collected her savings from her room on the second floor. It was now the middle of the night, and Aiden was afraid at first that the station was closed, but when they were only a few hundred meters away, he could see a light. Mr. Goodman, look, in the back. They're here. Aiden turned his gaze to the man in the black hooded robe behind them. So far, thankfully, it was just one. If he tried hard, he might be able to take him out. But what if he wasn't the only pursuer? So both of them ran for their lives. Their destination was not far after all, and indeed, they managed to get into the station before the man in the hood caught up with them. They walked away from the door and over to Alan's desk when the pursuer also stormed in. "Officers, this man is a cultist. Arrest him." The cultist didn't even seem to care where he was. He was still closing in. Alan drew his weapon. "Don't move. Stay where you are, or I'll have to, Dear me, Snake, that's enough. You scared them, and they're here now, so calm down. Jesus Christ." What had Alan just said? Had he called the man Snake? That couldn't be. "So, Mr. Goodman, since you burst into my office in the middle of the night, I guess you've finally read the diaries. That's great news. I knew you'd do the right thing. It would have been a shame if we had to kill them." The dead man who fell at his feet, the message on the human skin in the fridge, the cultists she arrested and then, strangely enough, killed in her care, and now it made sense. Alan was the leader of the inferno. "You don't want to talk to me? That's fine too, after all. You're a writer, and you will write." What was all this for? Why did they kill all these people? Just so I could read a book? Why not? Does it matter? Haven't you read what the people of this town have done? Who gives a damn about them? Aiden couldn't believe his eyes when the cultist who had just been chasing them through the streets took off his robe, relaxed, got himself a glass of water, and then sat down next to Alan. "They're all crazy," he said. "Perhaps, but this isn't about us. It's about them and what they decided to do. Will you stay quiet and leave things as they are, or will you reveal the glorious lie of no more to the world? It's your decision, Mr. Goodman. And I know you'll make the right one. In the end, you will be one of us. Go home. Think about it. We won't hurt you. You're playing on our team now." Could that be? Would Aiden Goodman become a member of the Inferno against his will? The two of them left the station, but they didn't know where they should go. If they took a train to the next town, the Inferno would surely follow them. They were everywhere. "Miss Keebler, we need to get our heads straight and think about the consequences of our actions. Do you mind if we stay another day?"
I thought you might say that," Janice said. "It's all right. We need to think things over calmly. We can manage one more day."
They walked back to the hotel, heads bowed. They now knew that the Inferno had full control over this city. After all these events, they didn't sleep in separate rooms, but in the author's. Janice got the bed, and Aiden made himself comfortable on the floor with a few blankets. They were so exhausted that they both fell asleep quickly, although Aiden didn't really sleep. He had a dream that seemed very vivid to him. A little too lively, he was called by someone. No, someone kidnapped him. The author found himself in a room with exquisite decor. The furniture was all highly ornate and looked incredibly expensive. He was particularly amazed by the two armchairs. Their surface was made of a very soft red velvet. Between the armchairs was a small table with an even more expensive-looking base on it. The room had no window and no door. "Am I awake or dreaming?" the author asked himself. "Both."
A handsome, middle-aged businessman suddenly appeared next to him. He was wearing an expensive blue suit and a red tie. "Please excuse the slight delay, Mr. Goodman. My name is Bilal, Lord of Lies, Prince of Hell. I'm delighted to finally make your acquaintance. Please take a seat." The handsome demon lord offered him one of the armchairs. Aiden, who was as confused as could be, simply took a seat. "So, you're a demon lord? Excuse me, but you don't look like a demon." "For a man like you, that's a pretty racist thing to say, Mr. Goodman. But that's okay. I'm used to dealing with prejudice. So, yeah, I'm a demon, and hell yeah, I look fantastic. Do I have another appearance? Yeah, but who cares? I'm not your typical demon, Mr. Goodman. I don't torture people, and I don't kill them. I'm simply a humble businessman." "Are you sure you're not just another member of the Inferno trying to upset and scare me?" "A member of the Inferno? Oh, now you're really offending me. The Inferno doesn't even really work for me. They're like a group of eager fans who want to meet their favorite actor. I may have spoken to them once or twice, but I don't care about them. I'm grateful that they showed me what a wonderful town No More is, but I want to do business with them, Mr. Goodman, but not with them." Aiden thought to himself that it was probably best to just play along. Slowly, he no longer knew what was real and what wasn't.
"What can a humble author like me do for a prince of hell like you?" Aiden said. "Well, what do you want from me?"
"That you write about what happened 50 years ago in No More."
"But I will anyway. I don't really want to seem rude, but what's the point of this whole meeting?"
"That's a good question, Mr. Goodman. You see, people not only want to hear the story about the burning of the slaves, as I call it, they also want their opinion on it. These days, people making up their own minds are over. Now, they want someone to tell them what their opinion should be and how they should adopt it. I know that they know it's the truth, and that's what makes your job even more important. We have to be very careful about what you write." That was an interesting statement, and it wasn't wrong. Was the demon lord really right? I never thought about it, to be honest. I think you're right. We authors have to be careful about what we write. Bilal was now in his element. "That's right. Consider the consequences. What if you write in an angry tone about No More and the freeing of the slaves? What if you tell them that the whole story was just the crime of a sadistic coward? That would be the truth. But what would be the consequences? People would get angry at No More, angry about freeing the slaves, and angry that they only lost their slaves because of a hoax. What if they decide to undo it all? That could happen. Unfortunately, there are still many people who regard dark-skinned people as second-class citizens." And you, the demon lord Bilal, you care about the community of these dark-skinned humans because... "I'm not interested in them. As I've already told you, I'm a businessman. And my business is lies. Do you know what every business needs? Marketing. And my business needs it more than any other. Lies have a terrible reputation. You deserve better. Look at what they've accomplished. They turned a despicable crime into the proudest moment of human history and freed millions of people from slavery. A simple little lie accomplished this. Isn't that remarkable? And that's why I need you as my new PR manager. When you write about No More, show people what the lie has done for humanity, how many people are now free because of it. Tell them to forget the truth. Lies are a better way to get through life. Why should you be honest? To hurt someone's feelings? To avoid getting the job you really need? I need you for all that, Mr. Goodman. What do you say?" That was all crazy. If this was real, and Aiden wasn't so sure yet, then hell and demons weren't exactly what he'd imagined. A demon lord talking about business and marketing? This could only be a dream. "I'm absolutely honest. I don't know. I don't even know what's real and what's not anymore. I don't know what I'm going to write." They will know that this conversation has taken place when I snap my fingers. You will wake up and you'll know it will be exactly 3:33. You'll be lying still in this room, remembering all of this. And I'm sure you'll make the right decision, Mr. Goodman. I mean, I'm not threatening you. I'm not like the others. Sure, I could have you and your entire family brutally murdered and tortured for all eternity, but that's not how I do business. I chose you because you're the right person for the job. Make good decisions. See you soon." The author didn't even have a chance to reply because Bilal snapped his fingers. He woke up immediately and found himself on the floor in his room. He looked out the window at the large clock tower on the town hall and saw that it was 3:33 a.m. So Bilal was real. He thought for about 2 hours making plans. Then he woke Janice Keebler. They had a lot to do. When Pastor Morrison woke up this morning and reached for the glass of water that was always on his bedside table, he noticed that there was something there that wasn't usually there. It was a piece of paper with a note on it. "I know what they did. I have the diaries and an eyewitness who is willing to testify. Come to the hotel and we'll talk. A.G." Morrison was shocked. If the truth came out, they would not understand his actions. They were not as close to God as he was. He had no choice but to meet with this damned author. For the first time in many years, he put on his normal clothes instead of his red robe, and out he went. He arrived at the hotel around noon. Zebediah Kane couldn't believe his eyes when he saw that the man standing at the counter was the pastor who changed his life so many years ago. "Pastor, what do you want from me?" "Hello, my boy. I don't need anything from you. I've come to meet one of your guests. His name is Aiden Goodman. Can you please tell me his room number?" Kane gave him the room number and then disappeared into his room. The pastor saw that the man had tears in his eyes, but he didn't know why. The stairs were a challenge for him, but he was still in very good shape for his age. When he went in and went on to knock on Aiden's door, he saw that there was also a note for him. He picked it up and read it. "Dear Pastor, you'll find what you need in the room next door. You deserve it. I'm sorry I didn't have time to discuss it with you, but I think this is something you should handle on your own." What a creep. He made the pastor walk all the way to this hotel only to stand him up. But at least he had left the diaries here. The pastor didn't care why he had done that. Maybe he didn't want to mess with God after all. Didn't matter either because he needed them. Cautiously, Pastor Morrison knocked on the door of Aiden's neighbor and then noticed that the door was open. He entered without asking permission and immediately noticed how cold it was. So cold that he could see his own breath. He couldn't see the diaries anywhere. He was startled when the door closed behind him. "Goodman, was that you? Scaring an old man is really sneaky. What kind of game are you playing in here? I'm warning you, you better not play games with God." When he couldn't get the door open, the pastor panicked. He pounded on the door with his fists, but it was no use. So he quickly stopped. What was that? Was someone crying? He turned around and saw that someone really was crying. It was John Miller, one of the slaves that he had burned alive 50 years ago. No, that can't be. How could you be here? You're dead. Get out of here, you unholy spirit. John Miller was still crying, but he was also shaking with rage. Just as he had recently stormed toward Aiden, now he stormed toward the pastor. Only this time he didn't disappear just before reaching his destination. He grabbed the old man by the shoulders. What are you doing? It hurts. No, it's so hot. Stop, it's hot. Have mercy. It felt like he was burning alive, but he was not. He screamed for several minutes until Kane finally found him. Help me, boy, I'm on fire. Help me. It hurts so much, I'm burning. He did not burn. He only felt what John Miller and his family felt when they died. And he would feel it for the rest of his life. Every second of it. Meanwhile, Aiden arrived at the police station. He looked like he was in a really good mood. Alan and the other two were sitting at their desks. Mr. Goodman, we weren't expecting you here yet. We thought you were busy. Oh, that was me. It was an extremely productive meeting with my new business partner. Business? You mean
Yes. Lord Belial has a really great vision of the future. His whole plan, incredible. Wouldn't you agree? His plan for the future? Oh, yeah, the plan. Yeah, it's great. Alan didn't know about any plan. Why had Belial told the author about it, but not him? It had been ages since he'd had any contact with his lord. Absolutely, and I'm so grateful that I can call this man my partner and my friend, and of course, I'm also grateful to be part of the plan. I mean, you guys know what happens to the poor souls who are out of the loop. The three cultists were taken completely by surprise. Belial had a big plan, and they weren't involved? They weren't part of his plan? The chosen one? Yes, poor souls, muttered Alan. You guys know about the plan, right? Asked Aiden. Well, maybe not every little detail, but Alan said when Aiden interrupted him. Oh, no, I'm sorry. After all, you guys, the Inferno, you're responsible for him and I'm meeting. Without you, none of this would have been possible. It's a shame. You don't deserve what's coming to you, Aiden said dramatically. What's in store for us? Asked Terry. Yes, I'm sorry. Maybe you should talk to him and see if he still has a place for you. But you should hurry. It starts soon. You better contact him straight away. Contact him? Yes. Don't tell me. He didn't even teach you how to reach him directly. Oh, you really deserve to be treated better. Okay, I'll tell you. The three members of the Inferno now looked up to him like little children to their teacher. We need chalk and 6 candles. Have you got anything like that? Then we need to head as far north as possible. The cell. Everyone into the cell, declared Aiden. Alan and the others did as they were told. Dutch got the chalk and some candles. Together with Aiden, they sat down on the floor of the cell. Alan, why don't you draw us a perfect pentagram on the floor? Not too big, but not too small either. The author suddenly stood up again. He had obviously thought of something. You put the candles at the corners of the pentagram while I get some matches. The 3 officers were so engrossed in their task that they didn't notice at first that Aiden had closed the door to the cell. It was only when he closed the door to the station office that he heard the vehement protests of the cultists. 4 hours later, Janice arrived with officers from Keeltown, the neighboring town. Thanks to Aiden, they found out that Alan and his friends had killed the real No More officers and taken their places. They had also told their families that they had been transferred for a few weeks. The author had already made his statement and made his way to the station where Janice was already waiting for him. He made it just in time for them to catch the next train. The 2 friends didn't know where it was going, but they didn't care. Later on the train, Aiden wrote something in his notebook. He wrote, "Burning No More's slaves was not only one of the last great crimes committed by us against all people of color, but against ourselves, the human race. The disgusting lie of No More's people after the murder accomplished nothing at all. Lies never do. They are for cowards. The liberations of the slaves of this world did not come from the lie, but from the good people who finally wanted to do the right thing. It was an idea that made this possible, not a lie. The idea that all people are equal." "Are you already starting to write your book, Mr. Goodman?" asked Janice. "No, not really. I've just written the end," he replied. Janice laughed. Afterwards, Aiden excused himself because he had to go to the toilet. When he looked in the mirror while washing his hands, he saw Belial for a moment and was startled. But nothing more. He simply ignored the demon for now. It was obvious that the Lord of Lies could not walk the earth. He was trapped, somewhere in the deepest depths of hell. The author knew that this was not his last encounter with the Prince of Hell. Hey, horror fans, want to learn more about the rise of the Demon Lords? Then subscribe and click on the next video.